This is the first time that Scotland's case has ever been presented to the international community. First time that we've ever had a chance to tell the truth about who we are and what this state known as the United Kingdom of Great Britain really is. So it's quite an experience to be here and a privilege to be with you all. Today, the world stands on a precipice, and the promise of the United Nations hangs in the balance. Never has it been so important to articulate and apply international laws and principles that uphold justice and the fundamental rights both of individuals and nations, because these are all that can light the way out of the darkness that is descending on our world. If, in the past, the international community has sometimes weighed the demands of justice and human rights against political pragmatism and opted for pragmatism, well, now we're paying the price, as international law is threatened with irrelevance, even as I speak. So, as I plead for my own nation of Scotland, I also plead for action, guided by an unwavering commitment to uphold what is just and lawful and clear, whatever the political cost, because failing to do so today sows the seeds of disaster tomorrow, if indeed there is a tomorrow for this violence-torn world of ours. What is just and lawful and clear in the case of Scotland? That's not a difficult question to answer. Not only does Scotland meet all the definitions of a non-self-governing territory, but uniquely, it also satisfies the definition of a dependency provided by its own coloniser, or administering power, to use the polite term. The British establishment has inscribed into the official record the privative definition, as you have heard, that Scotland is a nation and entered the union with England as a voluntary partner and not as a dependency. But this must also be read: if Scotland is not a voluntary partner in the union with England, then it is a dependency. The Scottish Liberation Movement, established 3 years ago, as notified this year to the Secretary-General and the Chair and members of the C24 of the United Nations, can show that this partnership does not exist. And so, as you have heard from my colleagues, both by de facto evidence and de jure, by the definition of the UK government itself, Scotland is a dependency, a non-self-governing territory, and the right of Scots to self-determination exists clearly, lawfully, and justly as the right to decolonisation. So, to recap why, a kingdom, remember the United Kingdom, a kingdom is the territorial jurisdiction of a crown. That is all it is. Without a single and united crown, there is no unitary, united Kingdom of Great Britain. No single and united crown of Great Britain was ever created. Although that was the whole purpose and intent of the treaty, the partnership agreement. Instead, England's crown incorporated Scotland into its own and continued uninterrupted. But because there is no unitary Kingdom of Great Britain, Scotland is not a territory within a unitary state, but a nation subjected to a foreign sovereignty. And because no new and unitary state was ever established, Scotland did not enter any union at all. There is no partnership in the state, which is just England continuing. So, when you hear the word British, please do not be deceived. It simply means England, nothing more nor less. It always has. And England has continued unaltered, except for a new name, and from 1707, absolute control of Scotland. With that control, it proceeded to abolish a fully developed and historic state. And then, as with every other colony, it erased our history, languages, trade, communities, social structures, constitutional provisions and rights, and eventually, the history of its own acts of genocide and ethnic cleansing of Scots from the record. On a personal note, I have only began to learn the history of my own nation when I joined this campaign, and I am in my 60s. Every feature that distinguishes a nation and a people colonised, subjugated, utilised for military and imperial ambition and plundered of its assets and resources, has applied or applies still to Scotland, just as they once applied to Ireland, India, and so many other nations. To administer and exploit a historically, culturally, and geographically distinct, a unique nation and people as a dependency is an ongoing act of colonisation. This is the scourge from which Ireland broke free after some 700 years, India after 200, and African countries like Zambia, Kenya, Tanzania, Ghana, and Nigeria after decades and decades. The same scourge, which after almost 80 years of global decolonisation now performs its worst cruelties on the world stage with apparent impunity. The Scots in general may have little understanding of what constitutes a colony, but there's no doubt what Scotland is. It is past time, surely, to consign that scourge to the dark annals of history for all of our sakes. But, says the British state, the treaty was signed and ratified, and the treaty defines Scotland as a voluntary partner in the Union and also establishes the United Kingdom as a unitary state. Well, we are to accept that the words of a treaty, and only the words, define the reality of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Scotland's place within it. We are to disregard the overwhelming weight of evidence for a substantive reality that bears no relation to the words, nor to any treaty or partnership agreement. A reality that proves those words null and inoperative. We must also ignore the evidence of 850 years of English history, starting with the Treaty of Windsor in 1175, broken 2 years later when the English Prince John was declared Prince of Ireland, and so heralding the centuries of Ireland's colonisation. Right up to the UK's violation of the EU withdrawal agreement in 2020. 850 years, where England, or England as Britain, has used treaties or agreements in precisely the same way. And I am perfectly certain that sitting here today are people who can say, yes, that happened to us too. As many as 200 such treaties and agreements followed this pattern. Used first as temporary instruments of legitimacy, then set aside, reinterpreted and violated once access or influence was secured, and finally, though breached and arguably void, retained as the basis of a rhetorical authority. This applies to Scotland and its treaty as it has applied to so many others that were never more than a means to an end, signed and then discarded in favour of colonisation. In the case of the Treaty of Union, however, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland can itself only exist as it has defined itself as the result of the merging of two sovereign and independent states if it is shaped by its own founding document. We've seen and heard how the continuation of England and the extinction of the state of Scotland replaced an international agreement for a new state with one united crown, kingdom and parliament. We have not heard what a united kingdom shaped by the treaty, the partnership agreement, ought to look like. It should be shaped, among other things, by the treaty's preconditions, the constitutional basis of the state to be created. Among these, the continued force for Scotland of a statute that underpins Scots common law and provides a codified expression of the most fundamental principles of the Scottish Constitution is the Claim of Right Act of 1689. This Act remains a UK statute, supplying the appearance of proof that the Union underpinnings are indeed in place. But this is appearance only. The Act is reduced to the same status as those Scottish MPs in England's Parliament, which, as the author and English spy Daniel Defoe observed, were allowed to sit there for form's sake to be laughed at. The Claim of Right Act 2 remains for form's sake.